Continuing the first phases by Sir Leonard Woolley. Of more than 1,000 graves at the early period, only 16 were royal tombs. The rest were graves of private citizens dug as near as might be to the resting place of what was considered to be a semi-divine ruler. Just as today in a Muslim cemetery, the humble headstones cluster round the doomed turba of a religious sheikh, but where the ordinary man was buried in a plain coffin at the bottom of a simple shaft, accompanied by such things as he might expect to need in another life, the vessels for food and drink, weapons and personal ornaments. Royalty had a ritual entirely of its own. And let us remind that the diagonal from across the hand is really as big as a Muslim tombstone is. All the grave goods and stuff like this has nothing to do with Islam. But who says that, the rulers bring their own way, don't they? Are the people who get fanatical about the sheikh. A square pit was dug deep into the soil, approached by a downward sloping ramp. In the pit was built a tomb of stone or brick, vaulted or domed. It might be a single chamber, or it might be a miniature house with 3 or 4 rooms and a connecting passage. The interface of the walls and the chamber floors were smoothly plastered with white cement. This was the tomb proper. Into it the body was brought and laid upon a bier, surrounded by offerings that testified to the wealth of the ruler in his lifetime and might serve his pleasure hereafter. 2 or 3 of his more intimate attendants were killed, and their bodies set alongside the bier. Then the tomb door was walled up. Next there came down the ramp into the pit, whose earth sides were masked by reed matting. The whole company of those who were to accompany the royal master to the other world, ministers of the household, musicians, dancing women, male slaves, and soldiers of the guard, even the chariot drawn by oxen or by donkeys, with the drivers, the grooms, and the animals, assembled in ordered ranks at the bottom of the pit. Presumably some kind of service was held in Queen Shub-Ad's grave. The fingers of the girl harpist were still touching the strings of the lyre, and at its end each took a little cup, filled it might be from a great bronze vessel set in the pit's center, and drank a draught of a narcotic, and lay down in his place and slept. And from above the mourners threw in the earth of the pits, making and buried the sleepers and the tomb chamber, and stamped the earth down, and made of it a level floor for the next stage of the ceremony. For the filling of the pit was a slow process, done in stages. On the floor, still deep below the ground surface, there was held a funeral feast, and then 2 or 3 or more human victims were sacrificed and laid out, and more earth was flung in and trodden down, for the same ritual to be repeated 2 or 3 times until the shaft was filled up, level with the surrounding soil. Probably, though for this we have no certain evidence, a funerary chapel was built above ground to mark the spot, a chapel in which offerings would be made to the memory of the dead and services conducted in his honor. This generalized description is no flight of fancy. It is based throughout on evidence afforded by the royal tombs themselves. In the case of PG 1054, we dug down methodically through the floor after floor in the filling of the pit, each with its votive deposits and subsidiary burials, till we reached the little domed stone chamber with its block door, against which had been put the bones of sacrificial animals, and found inside it the gold-bedecked body, with its dead attendants, and Queen Shub-Ad's grave. The musician, with her harp, and the singers formed a group apart. The grooms were there, with a gaily adorned and inlaid sledge chariot drawn by 2 donkeys. The keeper of the wardrobe lay beside the flat chest which had held the royal dresses. Inside the tomb chamber, the ladies in waiting were crouched beside the bier on which their mistress lay, shrouded in beads of gold and lapis lazuli and carnelian, wearing over her elaborately adorned wig, the massive gold hair ribbon, the gold chaplets, the 5-flowered hairpin of a queen, while on a shelf at her side was put another court wig, bound by a broad fillet of lapis lazuli, against which were set marvelously wrought little gold figures of animals and fruit and ears of corn. The queen's grave had been dug in the shaft of a slightly older tomb, perhaps that of her husband, whose last resting place she wished to share. The grave diggers had hit upon the vaulted roof of the old king's chamber, and, tempted too far, had broken in and plundered it of all its wealth, and had placed the queen's wardrobe chest over the whole to hide the evidence of their misdoing. But they had not disturbed the death pit. There we found all in order. 8 soldiers with spears and helmets lay in a double rank at the ramp's foot. Facing the ramp, evidently it had been backed down the slope, was the heavy chariot drawn by oxen wearing silver collars, the reins decorated with huge lapis lazuli beads attached to silver rings in their nostrils. The drivers and soldier attendants were with the car. Against the wall of the tomb chamber were the harpist and the singers. Soldiers guarded the walled-up door and stood against the matting-draped sides of the pit. There were 63 persons gathered there to die. In another case, PG 1234, the floor of the death pit was covered with bodies, all in ordered rows. 6 men on the entrance side and 68 women in court dresses, red coats with braided cuffs and shell ring belts, headdresses of gold or silver, great lunate earrings, and multiple necklaces of blue and gold. Amongst them was one girl who was not wearing her silver-haired ribbon. It was in her pocket, tightly coiled up, like a roundel of tape, as if she had been late for the funeral and had not time to put it on. Here there were 4 harpists with their lyres grouped together, and by them in an open space lay a copper cauldron. It was difficult not to connect these with a little drinking bowl found by every one of the 74 bodies in the pit. None of the private graves in the cemetery had anything corresponding to the wholesale slaughter. Even the richest of them, the grave of Mess Calamdug, which contained a princely wealth of arms and vessels in gold, silver, bronze, and stone, had in it no bodies other than that of the Lord of the good land himself, solitary in a wooden coffin. The built grave chamber and the human sacrifice were a privilege reserved for kings. It seems to imply a belief that those kings were at least semi-divine beings for whom death was but a transition. And if we may judge from the fact that so many people died with them without violence, to the accompaniment of music made by themselves and by means of a narcotic voluntarily drunk, surely these people were buoyed up by the confidence that is going thus in their Lord's company. They assured themselves of a continuance of their service and of an honorable place in that other world. Now, alternative religions, if you're going to compare them to polytheist, whether they call themselves monotheistic and aren't monotheist, or not, alternative religions tend to be safer, but at this point, not really. So we can't say this stuff about cults necessarily. Oh, they're going to mirror suicide, but look at the Crusades, and the killings by the Buddhists and different groups of Hindus against each other are really the main examples that we can point to, saying, is this greater number of deaths, even in the terms of the people who went and fight and got killed when they didn't need to, when they could have, made peace or something? Isn't this a greater scale of human sacrifice in a way? And isn't the greater increase in secularism just another form of this, let's kill we can bleed for me, as the song goes. In all the Sumerian literature that we possess, there is no hint of any such ritual forming part of the funeral of a king, and since the discovery at Ur was unique of its kind, some scholars were loath to accept any such interpretation of the evidence. They pointed out that few names recovered from the royal tombs did not figure in the list of kings recorded by Sumerian annalists. The fact of the burials were beyond dispute, but they preferred to see in them a sacrifice offered to the acknowledged entities, a fertility rite in which a mystic marriage symbolizing the earth's fruitfulness culminated with the kneeling of the bride and the bridegroom. The first point is true enough, but the Sumerian annalists enumerate only the kings of those dynasties which claimed to rule the whole land of Sumer. The occupants of our royal tombs make no such claim, but they do call themselves kings. Their names are not unlike those of the first dynasty kings. They might well belong to the same family, but judging by the archaeological evidence, they are older in date, and if so, were necessarily not dynastic kings, but vassals, lords only of a single city. They were the chosen victims of a fertility rite. They would scarcely call themselves kings at all. Further, Sumerian literature, which is rich in liturgical and religious texts, gives no hint whatever that there was any killing of the protagonists of a mystical marriage rite. No human sacrifice is suggested anywhere as part of the Orthodox religion. The assumption of the fertility rite, therefore, does just as much violence to the literary evidence as does the assumption that these are royal burials. More, in fact, there is no description of any royal burial anywhere in Sumerian literature. Again, the mystic marriage involves two people, bride and bridegroom, and if they had to be killed, surely they would be buried together. But each of the royal tombs at Ur contains only one principal body, yet a further
argument is this: the need for fruits of the earth is constant, and if a fertility rite is practiced at all, it should be a yearly ceremony, as indeed it was in Sumer in historic times. But in the graveyard at which must have been in use for many generations, there are only 16 royal tombs. Did men only 16 times in all those years take steps to secure a good harvest? And now evidence of the royal tombs no longer stands alone. At we found that 1,000 years later, the great rulers of the third dynasty at had vast tombs just outside the Tememnos wall, where numerous people were buried with them, tombs surmounted by a palace temple in which the eldest son of the house maintained the worship of the king, who was deified in his lifetime and counted as an entity, treated as a god after his death. It was an enduring tradition, though literature is silent regarding it, whereby God's tenant farmer partakes of his divinity and does not die, but is translated to the heavens. Well, that's sort of the case with all of us, right? Because we don't die, our bodies die. And, this mental construction of consciousness kind of, but do we make a real return, or have we corrupted? Here then, in this prehistoric ceremony at we have the graves of kings and commoners to teach us something of the thoughts and beliefs of a people who have left us no real written testimony of themselves, and to tell us very much about their arts and crafts and the material setting of their lives. Only in one respect does the evidence here compare poorly with that from other sites. We have not found such portrait statues as were unearthed in great numbers at Tel Asmar in northern Iraq in the course of the American excavations there. The reason is that at the site is a cemetery, whereas the building at Tel Asmar was a temple. To the ancient Sumerians, a statue was the last thing one would think of putting in a tomb. A statue represented either an entity, in which case the shrine was the obvious place for it, or the human worshipper. And the proper place for the worshipper, too, was in the temple, where he might stand day and night before his entity in perpetual adoration and prayer. For a complete picture of Sumer as it was 5,000 years ago, we must collect our evidence, not from one only, but from many sources, which in recent years archaeology has opened up to us. But nonetheless, the objects from the cemetery of bear full witness to the quality of the civilization which had been developed in the Euphrates Valley throughout the periods of Al-Ubaid, Uruk, and Jemdet Nasser, and was flourishing at the dawn of the historic age. And before we start to get into some of the plates here, let's remember the case, like, with the temple here. Now, if you pick a place, particularly if it's like communally accepted or something, but if you pick a place and dedicate it, this is for my worship or rituals or whatever you want to call it. And if you turn to a tradition, the effect could be even stronger. Stuff you're not going to do, stuff you're going to do. This is the place. And so, we haven't gone over completely in my channel everything that's done here, but you know well enough what is done and what isn't done as set rules. And so there are psychological effects, and that can have sensual correlations
But when you group together and do ritual, it tends to magnify even more than those individuals doing it. Those individuals doing such things together has more effect than anything they're going to do apart. You definitely see instances where the electromagnetic or other readings of a physical nature show up. But psychologically, spiritually, it's the main thing going on. Eher hahu pumluch gun nuit yaba is one of my names.